Hi guys, it's Professor Fernandez, and I am about to give you probably one of my favorite lessons. And it's kind of sad that we can't be together to do this lesson because I enjoy watching the looks on your faces when I say things, but it's okay. I will just imagine your awe astounding faces when I say things. This lesson is essentially called Sexy, Slutty, and Feminist. This is the lesson for Jamaica Kincaid's Girl and Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants. And this is a take about what's going on in both of these pieces. And you're probably wondering why I paired these pieces together. And there's a reason why, and I'm about to tell you here. So here I'm going to tell you and give you my warning. Excuse me, for those who um, need the warning. Um, we're going to talk about sex. But we're really going to talk about sex in a way that is kind of taboo as a subject in society and culture, and how these two pieces deal with sex as a taboo in culture. Sex dealing with sexual behavior, women's roles and relationships, feminism, patriarchy, abortion, among other things. So if these topics make you feel uncomfortable at all anytime during this presentation, you are welcome to stop this is how old I am. Stop the video, take a breath, and step out, essentially, virtually step out without academic penalty. And of course, rejoin the class when you feel you are more comfortable with these topics. So here's the thing. We are not going to get into groups, and we're not going to do this. But I am going to want to ask you, why do you think that sex and sexual behavior is a taboo topic in society? I'd love to know your answers. So let's get started here with the writer's purpose. We're going to start with Jamaica Kincaid first. And Jamaica Kincaid is not her name. It's an awesome name. Anytime you're named after a tropical island, it's pretty cool. But her name is actually Elaine Porter Richardson. And she was born in Antigua, British West Indies. So you probably got a sense of that here in Girl, that it is from literally another culture that isn't the typical American culture. She, of course, left when she was 16 years old. And then she came to America and she wanted to study photography. But instead, she started writing. She wrote for magazines, and Girl is one of the first things she wrote, and she got it into the New Yorker. And thus, a literary career began. And so, she is known for being really poetic, having rhythm and imagery and strong characterization, among other things. I've actually read a novel that she has written before. The Autobiography of My Mother, I think, is the name of the book, and it is indeed poetic and very symbolic. So what you have seen in Girl is actually comes out tenfold in novels. So of course you saw that this was in New Yorker, and if you read this and if I gave you a link, it is probably from the New Yorker, so it's the original publication here. And it's written in 1978. This is way before you guys were even a gleam in an eye. So this is the story's about 42 years old now. And so this is part of a short story collection called At the Bottom of the River, where she kind of explores the idea of mother and daughter relationships and identity and colonialism. And so colonialism is one of those isms that I want you to look up and to understand what that is, and the idea of how a society is structured around colonialism, especially on this side of the continent. Now let's move on to Mr. Ernest Hemingway. Some call him Papa. So Papa was born in 1899, right? Long been gone from the world. He's considered one of the best known American writers, and he has had a very interesting life. I highly recommend looking up his biography. He was a journalist, a soldier, among many other things. He has been married 4 times. I think that's important to know, especially with the story that we read. very, very widely traveled. Lived in Cuba still. There's still a Hemingway house in Cuba. Lived in South Florida. I believe it's in Key West. Has lived in Paris. Was a contemporary of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Um, he was part of pretty much a literary rat pack in Paris at the time. Um, he is not considered a feminist writer by any means necessary. Absolutely not known for writing anything feminist. He's actually probably the most anti-feminist person or writer you will probably meet, but it brings me so much joy to teach this story through a feminist lens. Every single time it just brings a smile to my face. So, there you go. So Heels Like White Elephants, one of the most well-known stories. He is well known for many books, many stories, but this is one story that I think is so well known, mostly because it's taught in high schools a lot. And the story does a lot of things, and so I can understand why it's very popular, especially in academia, because it does a lot of things with literary devices, a lot of things with imagery, a lot of things with inferencing. So yeah, it's a popular story. Published in May 1927, um, it's known for just being a story written in dialogue. And if I remember my history correctly, I think someone challenged him to write a story that's just dialogue, and this was the story that came out. This story is also known for having lots of tension in the story, how the tension builds up and builds up and builds up. And I think you've probably have seen that in the annotations that I've given you through Hypothesis. And so you see this tension build up between Jig, who was known as the girl first, and then you eventually know her name is Jig, between Jig and the American. He's not given a name. And so you kind of see the back and forth just in the dialogue. So this is not what we're going to do. This is usually what I do in class, but I do want you to be able to read the story, and I want you to read it like a script. And that's going to help you understand this a little bit more. So we probably have already talked about Raymond Carver's Popular Mechanics, and we talked about minimalism, and we talked about there being an imprint in the story. And so I want to return to minimalism here and say you get just enough to understand the meaning, but you don't get anything else. Just like in Heels Like White Elephants, you don't really get to see who they were before. You get to see who they were after. You don't get to see the decision that Jig makes. Does she carry on through the abortion? FYI, they're talking about abortion. Clutch your pearls. Does she go through with it, or does she dump him and have the kid? Does he kind of man up and like become like a full-fledged husband and family man? We don't know that yet. We don't know that at all, and we will and Hemingway didn't say that at all. So we can only glean from what's there. And Girl is not I wouldn't consider Girl minimalist. I mean, though there's some parallels to that critique, we don't know who the person is talking. We know it's a mother or a mother figure, so it could be a grandmother, an aunt, an older sister. We don't know much, but I don't think it's quite minimalism in that we don't need to know much in order to understand what this story is. So here's some differences between Girl and Heels Like White Elephants, especially when it talks about sex and sexual behavior and women and patriarchy and feminism, right? All those isms that we were talking about for this. We see that with Heels Like White Elephants, it really warns what could happen after sex, right? The idea of you will get pregnant and then you'll be left to hold the bag of this kid because that dude he just wants to keep like traveling the world and like everything will be the same, but it won't be the same, right? That idea. And it doesn't mention the aftermath, but skirts around the aftermath. Not once in that story does it talk about abortion directly. It talks about it indirectly. And so even that, the idea of, yeah, we can keep going if we don't have this baby, wink, wink, is not even talked about directly. It's very, very, very indirect. It skirts around it. And that's different than Girl, because Girl talks about how to avoid what could happen after sex or sexual behavior. The idea of don't talk to wharf rat boys. This is how you talk to a man. This is how you bully a man. Abortion is also talked about here, but it is talked about very directly, as in this is how you get rid of a child that you don't want. And so that could be as a consequence of sexual behavior, and that sexual behavior could be a wanted and received sexual behavior, or it could be an unwanted aggressive assault of sexual behavior that the child or a pregnancy can result from. And so we don't know what the terms of the possible abortion could be. We just know that an unwanted pregnancy, this is what you do to get rid of it. And so it mentions what happens if social behaviors are not followed as well in this. You become a slut. Slut shaming happens. And so here are some similarities. Both of these stories talk about the sexual norms around sex and being sexual. It puts the weight of the behavior, the consequences of sexual behavior on the woman. And we know this by looking at the endings of both of these stories. The woman is the brunt of the consequences of sexual behaviors. They have to make the decisions, and whether it is their fault or not, because it does take two to tango, they have to make those ultimate decisions. And both consider the recipient of the information, not women but girls. So look at the diction, look at the word choice here in both of these stories. Before we know Jig's name, she is described as the girl. It is the American and the girl. He is known by his country of origin. She is known by her sex. And so that tells us a lot as well. We also know that in Girl, the girl doesn't even have a name. In fact, we only know it's a girl because of the title, right? And so both of these women are known as girls. And the connotation of girl is that she doesn't really have choices. Things just happen to her. She is in a position of which she needs to be taken care of in a way. And so none of these women are even given their due, and yet they are responsible for these consequences. And that in itself reinforces and exposes patriarchy. So you're probably wondering what patriarchy is, and you probably have a definition or a meaning for this. And so I'm going to use the literary meaning. This is found in Bloom's literature, which you have access to through the databases here. And it's literally a rule by the father, and by extension, a societal system controlled by men. Patriarchy is a central target of feminist criticism, of which we are taking a feminist lens to both of these stories, which takes as one of its goals the unveiling of patriarchal structures in societies past and present. And so that is the definition that we are using to define patriarchy. So as we're moving forward, this is kind of how, when I say patriarchy, I am coming back to this definition of patriarchy. So of course I have to define feminism for you. So in its simplest terms, there's lots of definitions of feminism, by the way, and there's lots of shades of feminism. And so I'm going to define it for you again through Bloom's literature in a very simple term. It's the ideological position that men and women are entitled to equal opportunities, politically, socially, and economically. So that is the simplest terms. Both of these terms, patriarchy and feminism, have been defined in our national conversations as this and other shades of, but when we're talking about these stories, this is what I'm going to be using. So here's the big question, my friends. What is a slut? I'm going to want you to define this. Now, there's lots of definitions of sluts. You probably have given me lots of definitions. But there's a couple. I'm going to go to dictionary.com for this. And of course, we're talking about a sexually promiscuous woman or a woman who behaves or dresses in an overtly sexual way. I want you to see that that first definition talks primarily about women and not men. That second definition is an informal definition, and it says somebody who has an insatiable but often undiscerning desire to do or have something specified, i.e., being a shoe slut. You love shoes, so you have all the shoes. I love books. I'm a book slut, so I read all the books, right? Reading 5 books at once. I can't read 5 books at once. That's crazy. 2, maybe, but I like books, so I have all the books. Hence, book slut. Moving on. Okay, so then we need to look at the idea of slut and what that means in Kincaid's writing, because she mentions it a couple of times. And if you watch the video of her reading it, there's actually a lot, people are laughing when she first says it, but it's like a nervous type of laughter, like, oh my gosh, she said the word slut, ha ha ha, ha. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is what slut means when Jamaica Kincaid writes it. She's actually talking about somebody who is socially unacceptable. It's a jamette, essentially. Someone who goes against social norms and does so publicly. So think about this. A slut in this particular meaning, can mean someone who's sexually promiscuous, of course. So don't become the slut that I know that you're bent on becoming. But it also means someone who goes against societal norms, someone who goes against the grain. And so much of the direction that we have in Girl is about her not going against the grain. And if she has to go against the grain, how not to get caught. So women who express freedom of self-expression makes it difficult for themselves to submit to neat classifications of self in social categories. So this Antonia McDonald Smith is an academician who studies Jamaica Kincaid. Yes, you can actually get money to study an actual author and their works. And this is something that she was talking about as far as the meaning of slut in Jamaica Kincaid's writing. So when the mother says, you're bent on becoming the slut I know that you're becoming, what she's actually writing about isn't so much being sexually promiscuous. Again, she is writing about going against the grain, being the type of person that society looks at as unfavorable. And so there are rules. There are rules of duty and decorum that you as a girl in this world have to submit to in order to not be looked at a certain type of way. And so these are rules of patriarchy that are being reinforced. The idea that you have to wash clothes on Monday, do this, do that on a certain day. And if you see how all these things have to be done, you see a progression here. So this is like a story. You see something as basic from washing your clothes on Monday all the way through, this is how you get rid of a child, this is how you bully a man, this is how a man bullies you. And so you see that progression from something simple to something very adult. And so you have, that's how plot progresses. And so you have a plot going there. And as the plot advances, these rules of society being reinforced. And even the idea of it's okay to be a slut or to be an undesirable as long as you don't get caught, as long as it's behind closed doors. This is how you make a good medicine to throw away a child before it even becomes a child. So that idea, like I said again, whether the activity, the sex activity was wanted or warranted or given permission or not permission, there could be a result from that encounter. And from that encounter, if you were seen as someone who is undesirable, this is what you do, so that way you stay in people's good graces. This is what is called guerrilla resistance, essentially. So the private slut cannot show off how much of a jamette or a slut she truly is, but the jamette thrives on open and public rebellion. The mother's text preaches covert resistance. And that's the thing. So when we're looking at the story about Girl, we're looking at the story as not only as a story of a girl getting instructions from someone who may have been a slut herself, from someone who not only is telling her how to live, but really how to survive. And so this is a quiet resistance. This is a quiet resistance against a patriarchal and colonial system. So really, this isn't so much a story or a poem, if you want to consider this a poem, about what it is to be a girl. It is a story of resistance, how to survive. And so we have a lot of interesting things happening here. There's a persona happening here, which reinforces patriarchy. And even as it's reinforcing patriarchy, giving them solutions to the patriarchy, which I think is it gives an irony there that I think is really interesting. But there's no men talking here. The only men you see are like a dad maybe, and men who will be coming in her life eventually. So men are in the background. They're either catered to, manipulated, or warned against. There is not one man in here or example here of a loving relationship with a man at all. And so I think that is also very telling about the perception of men in this particular colonial patriarchal system, that they are indeed another force to be reckoned with and not so much a partner. And that is also very telling. It kind of makes me, as a woman reading this, uneasy. I can just imagine you gentlemen reading this, how it makes you guys feel. It makes me feel uneasy for you guys, essentially. Because you guys are not put in a very positive light in here at all. Again, this is the week of feminism and the week of reading things through a feminist lens. But yeah, you guys are getting a bad rap on this, and I'm not feeling it. But again, it's not about you, it's about us. So here we go. All right, let's talk about the language used here. The language used here, we have symbolism with blackbirds aren't blackbirds. Don't pick flowers because they may not be flowers at all, or they may be there, they may harm you. This symbolism really doesn't talk about blackbirds, right? It's not about the flower. It's not about the blackbirds. Throwing stones at blackbirds, you don't know if they're blackbirds at all, essentially, is the line. Literally means don't throw blame and don't throw shades at people. You don't know what's going on, right? Keep yourself to yourself. The idea of Bena is rock and roll songs, or songs that are secular in nature, and songs that young girls should not be singing. Wharf rat boys are the bad boys. Stay away from the bad boys. Every mother has told their little girl, stay away from bad boys, and yet we don't. And so it just happens. And then of course you see, again, I mentioned the progression between the kind of the things that this mother or mother figure, grandmother, aunt, whoever, is saying to the girl. The progression from washing clothes all the way through, after all this, you're not going to be the type of woman that the baker lets squeeze the bread. What? Yeah. So there's a progression here. And this is the argument that I make to say that this is a story. You can make an argument to say that this is a poem because of the structure of the story. It is not for me to decide. It's up for you to decide, because I'm not the one taking this class. Ha ha ha. But it's up for you to decide, and that's something you can actually explore in your journals if you'd like. There's lots of repetition and rhythm here in our wonderful story here. The repetition of slut and becoming one. The "this is how" phrase over and over. This is literally a how-to. This is how you do this. This is how you do this. And then, of course, this is broken up in semicolons and commas, and there's no stopping. There's just one long sentence. There is only one sentence in this thing. There is no sentence. There's just one. And the whole thing is one sentence. So that means there's pauses, there's no breaks. So when you see the girl trying to, say things back, she doesn't get a chance. There is no break. And I think the idea of there is no break, there's just pauses, also reinforces the idea of being a woman in the guerrilla resistance, in the quiet resistance of being a woman in a patriarchal and colonial society You don't get a break. You get a pause. You may get a day. You may get an hour. That's it. And it's continuous. And so I'm gonna put Hills Like White Elephants on a separate video so you can see, because this video is already a little long. So when we come back, we'll do Hills Like White Elephants.